So now we're going to talk about the actual American Revolution, the war itself. And at this point, the Americans have realized, after all the acts, all the things that have happened, that there's not going to be a way to reconcile with the British. And so now the war is officially going to be on. And it's going to begin with the shot heard around the world, which is April 19th of 1775. And a skirmish is going to break out in Lexington, Massachusetts. It's then going to spread along the road, basically between the cities of Lexington, Concord, and Boston. And to make a long story short, the English retreat to Boston with very heavy losses. And this is sort of one of the first skirmishes. And so, you know, at any rate, they go around, they're trying to catch some important people like Paul Revere. They don't find him. And so it's not really a full-on battle. It's more of a series of skirmishes, as I said. And it does show that they're going to take on basically a full-on war in order to resolve some of these issues that they were having. There's riots and tarring and feathering and the Boston Tea Party, and all of these things have really reached this crescendo that made war inevitable. And these are taking place in 1775, and you do need to remember that it's before that we've actually made the Declaration of Independence, which is going to be in 76. So this is all happening before the Declaration of Independence. But from April to June of the same year, the colonists are going to inflict heavy losses on the British. You're going to have the Battle of Bunker Hill in Boston, where you get the famous line of like, don't shoot them till you see the whites of their eyes kind of thing, where basically the colonists have the high ground. They end up losing the Battle of Bunker Hill, but say there's like a couple hundred colonists that are defending their position in Boston. There's some 1,000 British soldiers that are trying to get up this hill. If you've ever played King of the Hill, you know who has the advantage in that game. It is the person at the top of the hill, right? Because the person trying to climb is off balance and all this stuff. Well, imagine that game while you're trying to shoot them, right? You're trying to climb up a big giant hill while someone is shooting at you from the top of the hill down. So they're shooting directly at your head, and you're trying to shoot at them who are hiding behind a barricade. Obviously, you're going to have the advantage. And while the colonists lose, it's going to show the British that this is going to be a lot more difficult than they thought. They thought they'd just go in, send some British regulars, and boom, you know, rebellion taken care of. The battles of Lexington and Concord do take many lives, and like I said, we call them battles, but there's no real armies to fight here. It's more hit-and-run tactics. By the end of the day of Lexington and Concord, the British had lost 273 soldiers, while the colonists had only lost 94. But definitely the revolution had begun. The term shot heard around the world is actually started by the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it's not until much later he actually writes about this shot heard around the world, and there's a monument grave at Concord North Bridge that kind of memorialized this. But as the war progresses, we're going to kind of talk about the different war efforts. Now, despite the fighting at Lexington and Concord of April of 1775, there's still no full declaration of war by the colonists. They are going to have a meeting of the Continental Congress on May 10th, where representatives from all 13 colonies are present, and there are still a group there who actually don't want to make a written Declaration of Independence. Basically, they had been fighting against this idea of breaking away, but the events in Boston, the events in New York, the events in Lexington and Concord are finally going to convince everybody that they have to declare independence. And it's very, very important that we kind of remember that before this meeting, there was no defined idea of independence. After the meeting, they're all going to agree. Now, once you agree and list all of these grievances and send them to Parliament and the King and all of these things, and they sign their name to it, they have to be a really big step to do this. And we, declare war, we're going to have to put an army together. And part of putting that army together is deciding who's going to lead that army. And they're going to decide this guy, George Washington, is going to be the commander of the Continental Army. Now, George Washington was a British soldier. He had kind of got to prominence during the French and Indian War, had become a good general. He had a lot of, war cred, and but he had never been higher than a colonel at the time. Now, we think of George Washington with the white hair and all of this stuff, and we always see these pictures of him. I want you to have a clear understanding of who George Washington was, though. When he is appointed commander of the Continental Army, he is all of 43 years old. 43. That is not very old. It's a way less old now that I'm almost 33. Now I realize 43 is nothing, okay? Nobody better call me old when I'm 43, okay? My point is that you're putting this in the hands of, an untested general of sorts, but he had enough credit, and he is certainly no military genius, but he's going to have tons of leadership. He's very charismatic. He's very courageous, disciplined. He's very just. He's a great moral force. He's a symbol of the revolution. But in terms of military tactics, he's actually, not a military genius. But he does have a lot of integrity. They say, okay, well, what's your salary going to be? And he's like, I don't want to get paid for this. Like, he has a ton of integrity. The other colonies are going to worry that the northern colonies like Massachusetts and Boston and like cities like Philadelphia and Boston are going to take over this movement, and that they're going to be more in the middle. But Washington is actually from Virginia. So he's going to help ease some of those ideas that this is not going to be just a war of the North. This is going to be a war for everybody, because remember, Virginia's in the South. So he's going to take on this leadership role. Congress is also going to have to issue money to help pay for war debts. And then they're going to basically debate about whether to go to war or not. And then by the time it's all over, they've actually signed the Declaration of Independence. Now we're going to fast forward a few months here to the start of 1776. It's a very momentous year. We talk about Thomas Paine's Common Sense, this pamphlet that is published and spread through the colonies. And it's written, and people are very conflicted about whether to declare war. So he writes this in order to kind of say, hey, look, it makes common sense to declare independence. It makes common sense to rebel against Britain, who's being tyrants. And he denounces hereditary rule. He says, hey, you can have a great king, but what happens if his son's a buffoon, right? This is a bad way to run a country. And he explains this in very normal terms for the regular person. And so he denounces the monarchy. He denounces the idea that the colonies should be subordinate to the monarchy, that the British, they're way across the ocean. And so what he does is he says, hey, we need to be independent. And it's very compelling. He does a very amazing job at convincing people to do this. So Thomas Paine's Common Sense is written for the masses, it circulates, and it becomes maybe the most compelling argument for declaring independence. At long last, we're going to get another few months. It's going to bring us to the famed events of July of 1776. This painting by John Trumbull, aptly titled The Declaration of Independence, which he did in 1819, depicting the five-man committee that was drafted to work on the Declaration of Independence and present their work to Congress. Now, there are people who make a big deal about all of this, and they want to read into it. Understand, this is not what it looked like. Some of these people were not even here on the day it was signed. In fact, several of them were not. Remember, they're basically in open war at this time. Some of these people are leading militias. They're leading their own colonies' efforts. But when John Trumbull goes and paints this, he puts everybody that signs it there, even though they weren't. So whatever. You know, this actually hangs in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda today. And so Thomas Jefferson, who is going to end up being the primary author, also gets substantial help from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. Those are the three main writers of the Declaration of Independence. And it's kind of funny because, you know, a lot of the ideas there are not Jefferson's original ideas. You know, he basically gets credit for writing it, but James Henry Lee of Virginia is actually the one that proposed that the United Colonies ought to be free and independent states. And a lot of the ideas that Jefferson puts in there kind of get overruled because he was very heavily influenced by the French and their ideas and, you know, life, liberty, and property. And they're like, whoa, 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 not everybody should own property. We should say pursuit of happiness. And a lot of his ideas end up getting changed. But by the time it gets to July 2nd, they have a good Declaration of Independence. They're going to end up getting all of this signed, and it's going to become obviously one of the most important documents in American history, or in the world history, because it's going to inspire several other revolutions throughout Europe. And so it's going to formalize this kind of pseudo-war that's been going on. It's going to formalize that with congressional approval at this point. Now, we're going to talk about some specific battles, but we're not going to cover them all, obviously. We do want to talk about the advantages that each side had, and they're pretty simple. This could be a really easy slide to look at for like one of the short responses on the exam, I think comes from here. What are the British's advantages? Well, they have military superiority. The British Empire had a population of about 7.5 million people, while the entire colonies only had about 2.5 million. Okay? The British Army has a standing army of about 50,000 soldiers, and they have the funds necessary to hire another 30,000 German Hessian mercenaries, not missionaries. Then they also have the ability to play off the divisions among the Americans, because not everybody was on board with declaring independence. You had loyalists who were still wanting to be loyal to the crown. Then you had the patriots who wanted to declare independence. The British are going to be able to play on that and use the people who want to stay loyal to Britain as an advantage to them, okay? And so now the Americans have a couple advantages themselves. They have military experience. Most of their officers served in the French and Indian War. They had experience in the warfare of the colonies. They have home turf advantage. And they also have passion for a very noble cause, which was independence. They also have the benefit of the popular resentment against the British military. Because of all of these laws and acts that have been passed, you know, the colonists are really going to be upset with the British military. There's a resentment against them, and this is going to help them be very successful in recruiting people to fight. And so basically, you know, the militiamen are more armed with pen and paper and the ability to convince more people to fight. The British have all the weapons and the cannons and all this stuff. It looks like this is going to be not even a close fight. The British are obviously just going to come in and dominate and kick everybody's butt. And they far underestimate the ability of the colonists to wage war. Now, that being said, the American soldiers lack many things, and that's where Thomas Paine writes another pamphlet called The American Crisis, to basically inspire soldiers and people in the colonies to continue the war effort. And he has a famous line here, but it says, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." You had a lot of people that were wanting to only fight in the summertime. They were only wanting to fight because they were like, oh yeah, we'll go fight this revolution, you know, until the crops are ready to be picked. And then I got to go home and harvest my crops, right? Because, you know, if we lose, I still got to make a living, right? And if we win, I still got to make a living. And so basically this idea of, you know, keeping people strong-minded to stay involved. Places like And there was a lot of places that were very difficult. Valley Forge, the encampment of Valley Forge in the winter of 77 and 78, they had a lack of food. It was an enormous problem, no uniforms. The British, they have their nice, pretty red uniforms, and they're, dressed well for winter. They're well supplied. The Americans are scrapping together an armed force. But the Americans, they're just trying to put it all together. You have one Rhode Island regiment that was known as the Ragged, Lousy, Naked Regiment. Because they're just untrained farm boys, as Washington would put it, who would flee from their own shadow, let alone the experienced advance of a British bayonet and rifleman. So the Americans looked like they have no chance when you think about all the things that they need, but they persevered nonetheless. Washington is going to, on December 26th of 1776, Washington is going to take advantage of a break in the fighting for Christmas. He's going to launch a surprise attack on the British forces at Trenton, New Jersey, in his famous crossing of the Delaware, where they, attack on Christmas night. And you're like, well, it's the 26th. Yeah, but it's like the night of Christmas going into the 26th. And they're going to attack these Hessian soldiers, like German mercenaries. They basically are over there partying because it's Christmas, and Washington's like, oh, they're going to be, drinking and have a good time. They're going to be taken by surprise. And they're all, the Hessians, the Germans, they're all hung over. And it becomes a landslide win for the Americans. And even though they weren't equipped for this full-on battle, these kind of tactics are going to help push the American cause forward. And it's going to, of course, be celebrated in many forms, right? You have this famous painting by Emanuel Lutz that hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Again, this is one of Washington's great victories. And just so you know, we actually didn't have a flag at that point. So this flag is out of place. It didn't exist yet, which is kind of funny. But I like how Washington is just calmly standing there. There's ice everywhere, and it's, you have horses on boats back here. Like, come on. And so he obviously is going to take some artistic liberties when doing this, but, it is well venerated in American history, this idea that this was kind of a major victory for Washington. And I love how it's like, America, we'll kill you in your sleep on Christmas. Like, come get some. We don't care. So it's kind of funny. In fact, he does it again on January 3rd, that in Princeton, New Jersey, another surprise attack. And at this point, it's supposed to be like a gentleman's game. Like, you line up your troops over there, I'll line up my troops over here, and we'll just shoot at each other until somebody loses, which is stupid. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. If you're going to war and you're like, okay, I've got all my dudes, how do we want to do this? Hey, why don't we just stand here with our arms to our side and let them shoot at us, and then if we don't get hit, we'll shoot back. Let's not do that. That's stupid. So he realizes, one, the best people in the entire world at doing that form of warfare are the British. They have 10 times what we have in people. They can afford to just have people shot, but we can't. So he's going to change up. He's going to, use guerrilla warfare, hit and run tactics in the woods. It's going to become very effective. But this is going to become a major turn for Washington's strategy. And it's really going to turn the tide of the war in a lot of ways. Now, if you look at this map real quick, American victories are in the blue, British are in the red. So you have victories for the Americans, then you have the red where the British are going to win. There's a lot more blue than there is red here, okay? We noted the two big battles there, but the two that are the most important that we want to kind of touch on here is the Battle of Saratoga and the Battle of Yorktown, okay, where they are going to actually force the British to surrender. Here, and so it's a turning point again. Here, John Trumbull makes a painting, and you can see the surrender here. It's a turning point. It's probably the single most important battle in the American Revolution there. And it's because the battle at Saratoga in New York is actually going to convince the world that the colonists actually have a chance. And that is the major factor in the French deciding to support us in the war and then lending their help to us, and which is actually going to end up being the biggest factor to our success. So Saratoga, that's going to show that, hey, an American army can fight a British army and win at full force. And so definitely the single most important battle. And, you start drawing this line here and you start saying, hey, well, here's all the wealth. And now all the wealth is up in this area. And now all of a sudden the Americans are going to start winning battles up here. And again, that's going to get enough money to the colonists that now they can actually start to win. And so then you have, like I said, you have General Horatio Gates. He's going to basically win this Battle of Saratoga. He has 6,000 British troops that are going to surrender. And this is going to get lots of supplies. Eventually, like I said, the French are going to send their navy and French troops because, now they think, oh, we can actually help fight against the British because they had more problems with the British than the colonists. And so this is going to make a really big difference here, okay? So then the final battle is Yorktown. It takes place on October of 1781. There is lots of fighting between 1777 and 1781, but the Battle of Yorktown is by far the most important battle after Saratoga in the war. Americans are then going to be commanded by this point by Marquis de Lafayette, which is a French officer, and he becomes Washington's right-hand man. They're going to defeat Lord Cornwallis, who is the British general, and he is defeated precisely because of the French support. And Cornwallis is actually trapped because Washington is going to surround the city, and then the French are going to sail their navy up to the coastline and trap him from escaping to the ocean. So he basically ends up with no choice but to surrender. When he surrenders, he is the last major British army remaining in the colonies, and he is going to be forced to surrender. And so basically this is going to be the very end of the war, the last major battle. Now, there's going to be some intermittent fighting that goes on all the way to 1783, but that's while they're trying to work out these ideas of the Treaty of Paris. Ultimately, though, the American Revolution has ended. America sends three guys, John Jay, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams, to negotiate peace terms with Britain, which is kind of funny. They show up and they're like, hey, King George, sorry for beating you. What you going to give us? Which is kind of a funny thing because the British clearly just underestimated them at the time. The British could have sent their entire army and wiped them out probably, but it wasn't worth it at that point. The British population was kind of over it. And so they're going to get lots of territory. All this territory in green is going to be given to the United States, all the way from the East Coast to the Mississippi River, and all the way up into some of even the British territory in Canada. And so this is going to end up being like Maine and all of that. They also get fishing rights in the North Atlantic, and so this is going to be a big victory, obviously. They also return, the Americans decide that they will return property that they had seized during the war effort and not punish the people that had supported the British, and this is a rare incident where the victors of a war are very gracious to the people that they defeated. It's very nice. Now, the French still own the Louisiana Territory, which is all of this over here. Eventually, that's going to end up in American hands as well once Napoleon ends up having to sell it. But that's going to basically bring us to the end of this module. So we have won the war, yay. Now what? Now what happens? And that's going to take us all the way into the French Revolution in our next unit, but that ends our unit here on in Unit 1 at least.